To anyone thinking of writing a murder mystery, start with this simple formula: A plus B equals C.
One of the biggest authors of all time. His Alex Rider series alone has sold over 21 million copies. Anthony Horowitz is one of the UK's most successful authors ever. After being personally chosen by the estates of Ian Fleming and Arthur Conan Doyle to continue the infamous James Bond and Sherlock Holmes book series, his latest TV show is achieving great success on BBC iPlayer. Today's conversation is such a great one. For me, as an author, Anthony Horowitz is one of the biggest, most iconic, legendary writers you could possibly sit down and talk to. So I was really excited to be able to spend some time with him. And not only is this one of our longest conversations, it also is just jam-packed full of incredible stories and anecdotes. It's not just what Anthony says, but it's the way that he says things as well. It's just so amazing to listen to the way that he talks. And so I really hope you have as much fun listening to this conversation as I had having the conversation. I want to say a big thank you to everybody for all of the support and the nice comments and well wishes after our first conversation with Francis Rossi. But over 99% of you who watched that video were not subscribed. So if you enjoyed that one, if you enjoyed this one, if this is your first video that you've found us with, if you enjoy this conversation, please do leave a like, subscribe, a comment if you can, because it does, as I say, it helps us to continue to grow the channel and keep bringing you incredible guests like this. But without further ado, I will let you get into this incredible conversation with Anthony Horowitz. Legendary author Anthony Horowitz, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
It's a pleasure, Finn. Always very happy to talk to Suffolk Radio, and particularly when I'm talking to a fellow writer.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I feel like that accolade is slightly given a little bit prematurely when I talk to you, but I'm very grateful all the same. And obviously, being able to chat coincides with the release of a new series on BBC iPlayer, Nine Bodies in a Mexican Morgue, which is all episodes available now. And I have seen it, and so good. Loved it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Really loved it. We'll talk about that later on, but I want to, we were sort of talking a little bit before I sort of formally started, if you like, about writing. And that's where I want to go right back to the beginning. Sort of, what are your earliest sort of contextual developments into you really getting into writing and really having a passion in writing?
I think I was too young to have any contextual development, because I was actually 10 years old when I realized I wanted to be a writer and wrote
Wow.
my first full-length piece of work, not a novel, but a play. And the reason for it was that I was at a prep school, a boarding school in North London, where I was extremely unhappy because it was a very violent and dangerous place. You probably read about how it was for my generation, or for men of my generation all those years ago. The Earl Spencer has written an extremely good memoir of his time in a prep school, and all the horrors, which very much mirror my own. But anyway, in that was my context, and I was told I was useless at everything. My teachers had no time for me. I was completely ground into the dirt by this place, and found myself, first of all, in the school library reading books. And from there, it was a very short hop to realizing when I wanted to write books. I began to tell stories to the other boys in the dormitory at night, and that was how I made friends, because they enjoyed the stories. And so by the age of 10, I knew with absolute certainty not only that I would be a writer, but there was nothing else I could be, and that it was my life, and that was what I would do for the rest of it.
I was going to say, have there was the first thing you wrote published, or did you have manuscripts of stuff before? But considering you wrote something fully out at 10, was it quite a while before the first one?
No, I was writing throughout my teens. I wrote, if I read Virginia Woolf, I would then write a book in the style of Virginia Woolf. Every hero
Wow.
that I came upon in literature, I emulated and tried to pretend to be. And I can still remember, incidentally, about the age of 12 and 13, practicing my autograph for that day when I would finally be in a bookshop signing books. I was fixated by it. And I was very fortunate because I was published very young. I was 21 when I was published for the first time. The book came out when I was 22. It was a children's book, a very odd thing to write at an era before J.K. Rowling, before any really famous children's writers existed apart from Roald Dahl. Uh, But nonetheless, that's what I started writing, and I wrote children's books for about 10 years, and then moved into television, and then into adult novels, and into other areas too.
There's two books when I sort of think back to schooling that really stand out. The first one, it's the first and I think it is the only book I've ever read in a day, and that was I Know What You Did Last Wednesday. I took that out of the school library and I did not put it down until I finished it. And I then, when actually ended up going on sort of a bit of down a rabbit hole, if you like, with those. And the Diamond Brothers book series, I've still got them all in my bedroom. It's the series that I really bought into massively growing up reading. Um, and the other book, which I think I've read somewhere you were introduced to quite early on, was Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yes.
What's your sort of opinion on that sort of literature?
But that's sort of, if you mean Gothic romance or even sort of horror, which is what that book is.
Mm,
I actually discovered those books not through the books themselves, but through my mother, who
mm.
had a strange habit of going to horror films and then telling me the stories of those horror films as my bedtime going to sleep story. So one night it would be Frankenstein, the next it would be Dracula. The Fly was a favorite of mine, which is about a mad scientist who goes into a machine and comes out the other side of it with the wing and the head of a fly. It's a transportation machine, but a fly gets caught in it with him, and the two of them get mixed up. So I had a very sort of bizarre upbringing in many ways, and my imagination was obviously given a dark side. And then I've discovered, first of all, the Hammer horror films, which were huge in my teens, but I also then later on read all these books. I prefer Frankenstein to Dracula. I don't quite know why, but I've always found Frankenstein a really fascinating piece of work. Dracula, there's something about it, but it's a touch. I always find a touch laborious in the telling of that story.
Mm.
It's a fantastically imaginative piece. There was some wonderful writing in there, but nonetheless, there's something about it which I don't know, always leaves me a little bit unshaken when I read Dracula. But I've always enjoyed that style of books. In fact, it's Arthur Conan Doyle is a great,
Mhm.
I'm a great admirer of his, and he wrote ghost stories as well as Sherlock Holmes and science fiction stories too, Lost Worlds and that sort of thing, and Professor Challenger. So do I mean Challenger? Or yes, I do. That's very much colored my writing throughout my life. I have to say, I'm delighted you used to write with Diamond Brothers, and it's always a great joy for me as I get older to meet people like yourself, coming up in the world of media and knowing that, one little molecule of your blood or your brain was put there by me. I always
I
get
loved
great
it. I
sense of
loved them. I've got sort of vivid memories of my the most I would read the most when we'd go on holiday. So it would be we'd go on holiday and I would always go into WH Smith's and get a couple of books so I could be my holiday reading. And for a couple of years it was just Diamond Brothers books and I thought that were just loved them. Genuinely such good books.
Oh no, I loved writing them too, and because it was in my career, I had written 10 books before my career really took off.
Mm.
Speaking to someone who has now published one, it is sort of the warning that it's not
Yeah.
overnight success, it never or very seldom comes overnight. And I think actually that's probably a good thing. I had 10 books in which to sort of experiment to discover myself before I wrote Alex Rider, and that was what sort of broke the glass ceiling. But before that, there were the Diamond Brothers, and I used to love writing them. I absolutely adored it. I used to send people letters in the by as if from Tim Diamond.
Mm.
I have a file somewhere of him complaining to the publishers about how few books are being sold and always blaming the writer. I suppose, my first steps, and I think about it, into metafiction.
Mm. It's such an interesting thing you touch on there because I hearing you talk earlier, you were saying how you would read something and then emulate it. I I wrote my first book, as is the one I'm working on at the moment, are both set in the First World War, because it's something that I've always been quite passionate about and always had an interest in. Um, did you do you early days, even now maybe, but probably more early days because I feel like it's probably quite second nature to you to sit and just write now. Um, Were you sort of influenced to write things based on what you felt you had more of an innate ability to talk about, or was it just whatever you were sort of consuming and absorbing?
It's a difficult question to answer. I remember that my first 10 books were largely autobiographical. They all sort of, apart really from the Diamond Brothers, that they tended to be about rich kids, rich, unhappy kids having adventures. And that was me. My parents were wealthy. I was very unhappy. I had a sort of strange upbringing, and I dreamed of having adventures. And those were what I wrote about for 10 books. So things like Granny or The Switch or Gruesome Grange, they're all sort of thinly disguised accounts of my own life. I mean, fantastical ones, but even so, based on me. When I junked that and decided to write it, I decided around about the year, gosh, it must be about 2000, to stop doing that and to move into an area about which I knew nothing, about which, about something that was, I would create a character who was entirely different to me, who had no comparison with me at all, and didn't have unhappy parents and didn't have an unhappy childhood, rather. I mean, and that was Alex Rider. And it was doing that that broke the glass ceiling. And suddenly, the first book, instead of selling sort of 3 or 4 thousand copies in a year, sold 25,000 copies, and then 50,000 copies for the second, and 100,000 for the third, etc., 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 until suddenly we're talking millions. And my career then exploded, and I was able to write about anything. Alex Rider was inspired largely by James Bond, about the books that I read. I mean, I always used the books that I loved as a sort of a starting point. I was given Sherlock Holmes when I was about 16 or 17 and loved those stories, and that led me down the path of crime writing. So, to new writers, I always say, read, keep reading, because it's in other books you find not something to copy, but something that will inspire you.
Yeah,
The
100%.
Fourth World War, incidentally, I think is a very, very rich area. Of course, it's a very well, there are many, many authors writing about it, but I myself, of course, have written a great deal about the Second World War,
Yeah.
Foyle's War, and the new book I'm going to write next year,
Mm.
Second World War as well.
Yeah, I do think that's on the nail for me. I When I was writing, I noticed a real shift. I started writing, and I, in fact, I started writing. I did sort of the first 3 or 4 chapters, and I wrote the entire thing between the summer of between second and third year of university. So I thought to myself, I'm not really, the summers were long. They were sort of 4 months. I thought I'm not going to have this much time at another point because this time next year I'll be looking for work. So I might as well just dedicate my time to it now because I'd had the idea from when I was about 16. So I thought I'm going to put it all down onto paper. I got about 3 chapters in, realized that I was trying to rush to the action and had to sort of strip it back and reconstruct a lot of it. But then I noticed a massive shift in my own writing when somebody gave me a copy of Birdsong and I wrote Birdsong. And after reading that, I didn't write much while I was reading it. So I kind of consciously decided that I was going to park it, read the book, and then go back to it. And I felt that my writing had sort of developed, even in terms of sophistication, to when I started. Or I almost felt like I was just, a 19-year-old sat at his computer writing before. And then I wrote it, and it felt like I'd sort of gained a real intent and purpose about the writing style. So I certainly see what you mean about picking things up. In terms of when you talk about these crime books or anything that you write, do you have the entire plot mapped out, figured out, planned before you go, or does some of it sort of develop with you?
I have about 70% of it mapped out. I do quite detailed structures. I do spend a lot of time making notes and schematics and working on who the characters are and certainly the action sequences, etc. But I leave about 30% to discover when I get there. And what I tend to say is that there are writers who are different. Every writer has different rules. I know writers who just write a first sentence and then see where it takes them. But for me, especially writing quite complicated and complex murder mysteries, I need to have a map, a plan. And the whole point of a map is that it doesn't make you go in one direction, it allows you to go in any direction that you wish to, because you can choose the paths you take as you go, as long as you always know where you are and where you are heading. So your destination, which is the final page, if it's a murder mystery, shall we say, the solution is in front of you and you know how to get there. But on the way, you can take a different turning if that's what you fancy. And I often do that. And I often, when I'm writing an action sequence, will have a character in jeopardy, but won't know how to get him out of the jeopardy until I actually arrive at the chapter.
Yeah. So what does your planning sequence look like if I suppose that's what you call it? Your process.
It's a series of questions to myself. It's page after page in a notebook. I have loads of them here in front of me. I mean, it's a series of. Here we go. This is my latest notebook. It'll have that's what it looks like. I mean, it's if you can see,
Yeah.
it's and it's there are hundreds of pages of this stuff in here, diagrams, schematics. So that's just planning the relationships between the various different characters in it. I ask myself questions. Who does Harry kill? Police get the wrong man. Do they? Question mark. Why? Who does he kill and why?
Yeah.
Was the husband the suspect? So these are questions. It's almost like a sort of writing down my garbled thoughts on the page, so that each thought becomes a piece of a jigsaw that I can then assemble later. Then I have whole lists of ingredients on a page. That's 9 chapters of a book being planned out chapter by chapter by chapter,
Yeah.
um, and it's just like that. So it's a series of fragments put it onto the page to bring together at leisure as I'm writing.
Something that I did, like I say, I had the entire premise of my first book by sort of 16, 17, and it just stewed in my brain for a couple of years. So when it came to writing, but also planning, it felt really natural because the story was already there. I then got to the point where I'd finished and I was trying to I had rough guidelines of what I'd already thought I wanted the next one to be about beforehand. But when I'm looking to plan it, it's almost the first time that I've really had to think more in depth about a plan, if that makes sense. And that's where I've sort of struggled, maybe thinking, I don't know if I've planned enough or what bits should be planned, or is that sort of unique to each book, would you say?
I would have said that your worries are unique to each writer. I mean, every writer has his worries or her writer worries, and every writer has a lack of confidence and a sense of failure, fear of failure, fear of being found out as a failure, and fear of an audience that is invisible, because after all, you don't really get to meet your readers unless you get to literary festivals, and even then it's only a handful. So all of this is perfectly reasonable, but at the same time, I think there is a danger that you can overanalyze, you can overthink things. Writing is, at the end of the day, in my mind, and again, other writers might disagree, is something that is instinctive. It is something that you just know. You listen to that voice in your own head. You have the belief in the idea. When you think up an idea, and I think up probably 10, 20 ideas a week. Not, I'm saying good ideas, but nonetheless, ideas keep falling into my head.
Yeah.
And you just think to yourself, is this an idea I want to spend 1 year of my life, or maybe even 2 years of my life, developing, writing, selling, hopefully getting published, seeing in shops, talking about if you're invited to do that, and generally living with it. And you just know. And you can make structures until the cows come home. You can do it for hours and hours and hours. But at the end of the day, writing is about you sitting at your desk with your computer, or in my case, my fountain pen, and writing what I believe. And that is the core of it. And your question to me suggests, particularly as I understand you're now working on your second book, a sort of almost a sort of a fear of it, and an over worrying too much about it. Write what you want to write. Write what you feel somebody wants to read or hear, and worry about the sort of the sales, the production of it, the structuring of it, the whatever. Worry about that in a different compartment. Enjoy
Yeah.
the writing.
Yeah. Something I'm going for with this book that I'm writing now, which is something that you do all the time, something that murder mysteries are sort of very synonymous with, and moving sort of into the pathway of the series, is sort of time jumping backwards and forwards. How much do you enjoy writing that, and how much is it almost a challenge or require extra prep for that to all be clear and concise?
Well, I've met writers who say well, time should never go backwards. I mean, time moves forwards, and so should books. And actually, I don't use flashback as a device that often,
Mm.
either in television. I mean, occasionally one has to, but not in my books. I don't think. What I do is have two stories. One might be set in 1950 and the other in the
Yes.
present day, and they intercut with each other, one informing the other. And there are times when I think to myself, why do I make it so difficult for myself? On my last book, Marble Hall Murders, I nearly ended up in hospital because there were so many different timelines and so many characters interacting, and I had a copy editor who went mad and kept telling me that this didn't work and that didn't work, and I'd got the wrong time, the wrong day, the wrong age of a character. Everything was wrong. I knew that the story was working, but I got absolutely flummoxed and ground down by the different timelines. And to any other writer, I would say life should be easier. I mean, I don't know why I do it to myself. All these pages I just showed you of notes, it's sort of, I would love to sit down. In fact, I'm going to do that next year. I have a book I mentioned set in World War II,
Yeah.
and it is a straightforward, it's got twists and turns, but it doesn't have any timeline or
Yeah.
complexities.
I did want to ask because sort of researching you and sort of the stuff that I already knew, you spoke about James Bond and Sherlock Holmes earlier on. Then writing James Bond books, what was that experience, those experiences like Sherlock Holmes as well? What were those experiences like for you as a writer and also, I guess, as a fan from beforehand?
Well, because I was a fan, it was an enormous joy. I mean, to actually be invited by the Conan Doyle estate to spend, as it were, 6 months inside 221B Baker Street in the
Wow.
company of two of the great. No, no, I'm not talking literally,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
because
yeah, no, yeah,
221B
yeah, yeah,
is
yeah.
is a museum, but I mean in terms of my
The
imagination, to
world
be
of,
inside
yeah,
that room with two of the greatest characters in British fiction, and to be able to listen to their voices and to share their experiences, it was a fantastic experience. James Bond was my lifeline when I was a boy, the films and the books. And so once again, to tread in the footsteps, I should say to stand in the shadow of Ian Fleming, was an incredible privilege and a joy. I was a little nervous because these are worldwide icons, and who the hell am I to be attempting to do what Doyle and Fleming did? I'm not anywhere near as good as a writer as they are. So there was a certain element of challenge and can I do this? But once I'd started, and once the sort of the first chapters were done and it was all rolling, I just reveled in it. I had an enormous fun, and it's also great to when you're writing a book and you have to invent everything yourself, that's in some ways more difficult. Not that I ever use the word difficult particularly, because I don't believe that writing should ever be difficult, but it is more of a challenge than if you are already given amazing characters,
yeah,
fantastic locations, a
yeah,
real tone and flavor, and a knowledge of what is right and what is wrong. It's why, incidentally, my James Bond books were set in the 1950s and 60s, because to me, to have made them into the modern days, which
yeah,
Jeffrey Deaver did, for example, would have been impossible because I would have been shedding so much of what makes those books work.
yeah. Did you find with that that it was any of the nerves almost wanting to put your own style on it too much, maybe, or did you enjoy the fact that you could also bring your own flavor to what was already there?
No, no, it was the opposite. When I took on Bond and Sherlock Holmes, I am knew that my likes and my desires and my voice and uh my way of writing should be hidden. I should be invisible.
I
It was an
see.
act of ventriloquism. These books were meant to be as if written by Fleming and or Doyle. And so I think it was you need to, if you're going to do a continuation novel, which is what these things are called, not that I particularly like that expression. I think you've got to start with humility. I think you've got to know your place. I never did anything in any of the 5 books that I wrote about those two characters that I think Doyle or Fleming would have disapproved of.
That's so
So, for
interesting to
example, I
hear.
mean, Bond smoked. Sherlock Holmes did not have a girlfriend. Bond was quietly sadistic. I mean, there were elements, the things that were in those books. I didn't worry about modern mores too much, and his attitude to women, for example. I actually don't think that Fleming is as much of a sexist as modern readers might think, but nonetheless, it didn't bother me that he had a slightly sort of laissez-faire attitude to women.
Yeah. The last thing I'm really curious about before we talk about TV, um, is I'm 22, and I will often say that I am very glad to have grown up at the time that I did, where going to bed when you were a child was, mum or dad reading stories, reading books or whatever, and reading was perhaps more prominent because it wasn't get up and here's an iPad or whatever as soon as you get up, as a lot of children are nowadays. Um, how do you think it? Because reading in particular is so important when you're younger. The age in which we're moving to, how do you think it can keep its level of prominence in children so that it's not something that's lost?
It's one of the most serious questions of our time. You are growing up with social media and with a mobile phone in your pocket, and we are talking on Zoom. So technology is very much guiding your life. Whereas because I'm so much older than you, or half a century older than you, I grew up in a very different world. Now, people of my age tend to think that it was all much better when we were young, and that the modern young people are feckless or sort of shallow or whatever. I don't believe that. I think that the modern world will bring its own joys and pleasures, just as my world did for me. But that said, I do think that reading is now an endangered species. A recent report by the National Literacy Trust pointed to the fact that less than, no, just over a third of children now, when questioned, said they do not enjoy reading. They never read for pleasure outside school. And that's the first time that that figure of 33% has been broken. And I think that there have been some very, very good books that point out the terrible harm being done to young people in terms of mental health, happiness, well-being, confidence, and independence, and socializing skills, which are being done by mobile phones. The huge, if you remember that picture of Trump at the beginning of his presidency, surrounded by all the people from Silicon Valley standing behind him, it
Yeah.
really was like a sort of a very, very bad James Bond movie, because these are the people who are now controlling the world, no doubt about it. And that is not healthy for the world, nor do I think it is healthy for you. Books remain, for me, one of the great pleasures of life. They are free of charge. You can go to a library and read any book for nothing. You
Yeah.
can get books on Kindle for very little money. You can go to second-hand bookshops and find books for less than the price of two or three cigarettes. I mean, reading is more accessible than it's ever been, and I think that to not read, to not enjoy books, to not discover the escape, the pleasure, the information, the happiness that books bring is awful. So it has always been something that I have championed and talk about publicly a lot. The need for school libraries, the need for time at school to read, the shared reading, reading out loud. Reading does so much for human beings, and it makes me very sad to think that young people may be turning their back on it and being drawn into the algorithms and the sort of flickering lights of social media and iPhones.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And flickering lights and TV lights, a little sort of segue in, if you like. What the biggest differences for you in writing for TV? You've obviously done it a lot as well, but writing for TV and writing literature.
Well, I think first of all about the similarities rather than the differences, which is
Mhm.
telling stories and telling stories to an audience that needs to be entertained and that will leave very quickly if they're not being entertained, and the need to hold on to your audience to keep the suspense going, to keep your story sort of, it's almost like hands reaching out from the book or the screen, grabbing the viewer or the reader by the throat and keeping them in place. So I think that there are more similarities and differences that certainly interest me. There are, of course, the main differences, which is that television is collaborative. For me, I'm sitting in a room where I spend probably 10, to 12 hours a day, every single day of the week, every day of the year. And to get out onto a film set, to go to have meetings with producers, with casting directors, to meet actors, to go and see sort of my stories being made by somebody else is it's a wonderful break from what I do. And I love the sort of the just the sort of the excitement, I suppose, of seeing a show being made. I was standing in talking about nine bodies in a Mexican morgue. I was standing in Gran Canaria in Tenerife in Gran Canaria where we were shooting this thing. And here we've got all these actors. We've got a jungle. We've got a plane that's been crushed, and we've got cameramen, and we've got costumes people and props people. This army of people on an island in the sunshine. And I think like, wow, this all started in my head. You don't get that when you write books. You don't see all the work that goes into making a book, but watching a film being made is a real buzz.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to it then, because as I say, I've watched it. It's available for anybody to go and stream all the episodes now on BBC iPlayer, and I'd massively, thoroughly recommend people go and do that. I was going to ask about the location of filming actually, and something that therefore you talk about. What when you're writing something, and let's take this for example, when you're writing this and then you see it brought to life, is it how you imagine it to be, or how is it when you actually sort of see it come into fruition?
It isn't quite. It's not quite like that. I was on the set of Marble Hall Murders as well, which is going to be on BBC next year. The Susan Ryland series. And it was the same with Bodies. It's it's different. It's sometimes better. Occasionally you look at things, you say, no, that isn't quite what I want to. But then I can always talk to the director, because being married to the producer, Jill Green is the producer of all my shows, and we've been married for 35 years. We have a very, very close understanding of what we're trying to achieve on the screen. But often things have to change for all sorts of different reasons. So when you say, is it what you imagine? I imagined Marble Hall Murders to be set in the south of France. That's the book I wrote, but actually we filmed it in Corfu because we couldn't afford to shoot in the south of France. So no, it's not how I imagined it. But at the same time, the acting, the costumes, the dialogue which I wrote, and the sort of the world of the piece is exactly what I wanted. So it's the same but different, and the joy of it is that both the same and the different can be celebrated.
Yeah, 100%. How proud are you of it? It's, as I said, it's such a great series. Now you see it come out and you see the spectacle of it being filmed abroad, and the scenery is brilliant in it. How proud do you feel of it now?
I think I never sit back and say, "Aren't I wonderful? Isn't that great?" But I do look forward to talking to somebody like you. You just said how much you enjoyed Nine Bodies in a Mexican morgue, and that to me is makes me smile. It's at the end of the day, why do I write these shows? It's not for the money. It's not for the sort of ego chip of it. I write for the same reason I told stories when I was 10 years old, to
Yeah.
entertain people. And I'm very, very proud and happy if that works. Now, if you had not enjoyed the show, and I'm sure there will be amongst your listeners people who do not enjoy the show, what can I say? I've done my best work. I can't expect everybody to love everything I do. But
Yeah.
that said, the response to Nine Bodies has been largely excellent. Lots of people have emailed and texted me and said how much they've enjoyed it. You've said nice things, so I'm feeling pretty good.
What is the, so because obviously you wrote and created it and also an executive producer in the process.
Yes.
How much, responsibility is that? That sounds like like quite a lot.
No, it's not. I wrote the scripts, and that's basically all I did. The EP side of it is only because what that's acknowledging is the fact that I have watched all the rushes, and that's quite a lot of work. And I've gone back and talked about the editing process. I was involved in the casting. When people were being cast, I was always asked my opinion and my thoughts. And in fact, there was one cast member that I did not think worked, and we changed that cast member. And I'm not that was not to describe the actor. The actor was great, but it just didn't seem to quite
Yeah.
match what I had in mind. It was your earlier question about, expectations and what you think a character should be. So I do a lot of work besides the writing, but I'm not in control. I mean, we had fantastic directors, two great directors. We had uh, Jill Green and Eve Gutierrez producing the show, and such. So actually, it wasn't Eve who produced it. I'm going to get told off by the producer if he hears this, but never mind. it was the show was in great hands, and that's the thing. You trust the team that makes the show. And at the end of a show, some I've done shows in the past where the end result has been enormously disappointing, but you never blame somebody because a film or a TV series is 1,000 decisions.
Yeah,
Every minute of a day, you are making decisions. How does this character move? What does this character wear? Can we afford this scene? If we can't afford it, shall we do it that way? All these decisions you make, and at the end of the day, the success or not success of a film or TV series is not in anybody's control. It's like an army or maneuvers or a cruise liner heading through the icebergs. It's
yeah.
there's so much happening that you just have to hope for the best.
How did the story come up then when you first created it?
I was asked to do a very short form drama by a company called Quibi. It was going to be very, very fast, 9-minute episodes,
Oh
which
wow.
would be viewed on the telephone. And I came up with sort of something not dissimilar to this idea. And my first thought was, well, let's have lots of murders. Let's do sort of an Agatha Christie style. And then there were none, where you have 10 people, 9 people, 8 people, 7 people, because
Yeah.
that'll keep you watching your phone. And that was where it began. But I'd also, for a long time, had it in my head. I told you earlier in our conversation that I have a lot of ideas. And some years ago, I had an idea about a plane crash in which, after the plane has crashed, somebody starts murdering the survivors. And what fascinated me, and as I worked on the idea, was not who did it, but why. But
Yeah.
why? Uh, why did they do it? Sorry, I'm getting interrupted by pings and dogs and everything else. Um,
Yeah,
um,
and I actually think that is watching it is the question that you ask more than the who is the why is this person?
Why is the fun of it for me? When you get to the end of the show, I think there's a shot in episode 6 near the beginning, which is the sort of the start of the reveal, which just made me smile from ear to ear when I wrote it. And I think that the sort of the reasoning behind this, why all these bizarre murders have taken place, is one of the things I'm very proud of having come up with. I'm very happy with that.
That's amazing. As I say, I urge everybody to go and watch it because it is an incredible series. I'm not just saying it because I'm speaking to you at the moment. I did thoroughly,
Well,
thoroughly.
thank you.
Now we have to obviously talk about we are the one thing beyond writing that we both have in common is a love of the county of Suffolk. Where
Indeed.
where did this come from for you?
It started about 40 years ago, 35 years ago, when I rented a small house near Earl Soham, outside Framlingham. I was living in North London in Crouch End, and that was a very easy journey to Suffolk. And we started going up at weekends, and we used to go walking in Orford a lot and along the river, and opposite the Orford Ness. And there was this little tiny house. I said to Jill, that house is where I would like to write my books. And 20 years later, that house came on the market, and we were in a sort of bidding war with 4 or 5 different people. But somehow, not by paying lots of money, but just by good luck, we managed to get it. And we've sort of been there ever since. I'm not a weekender, I am a second homer owner, but it's tiny. And so I feel it's where I have written 6 of my novels. All of them, the whole thing, just got, and I got up there for weeks at a time, or I used to, less now because I'm so sort of out of the country and away and traveling so much. But I have written, but 2 of my Sherlock Holmes novels were both written there. One of the Bonds and Magpie Murders I wrote there, um, and it is just the greatest, most inspiring place for me in the whole world.
What makes it like that for you? Because that's really interesting to hear.
I think Suffolk is a very, very special county because of partly because no motorway goes there. It's sort of bypassed by the big ones, and it's a combination of things. The light, the ever-changing light, the fact that the skies are so huge. You feel with a sort of you feel how small you are in nature, and yet you feel at one with it. I love the people of Suffolk because there is something about them. They are so different to people in Norfolk or in East Anglia. There is something very special about people who live in Suffolk, maybe because they know how glorious their surroundings are. That isn't incidentally to say that everybody in Suffolk is privileged and well off. You probably know that I am a patron of a charity called Suffolk Home Start, and there
Yes.
are pockets of great lack of privilege and lack of wealth in parts of Suffolk. And the reason I work with that charity is because they do such a brilliant job of supporting people who need support, going into people's homes and into families and actually working, as it were, at the coalface and working, an army of brilliant volunteers, the very best Suffolk people who work for Suffolk Home Start and just for no recompense at all, other than for the act of doing good, go out and help people. And that's a wonderful thing to be part of. But again, I have a dog. I walk in Suffolk. The walks are astounding. They're so beautiful. The churches in Suffolk are just incredible. Blythburgh Church. I mean, is there a church in the world quite like it? So improbable, so huge, sitting there on the marshes. Why? How did it come to exist?
Yeah.
It's incredible. Benjamin Britten, the sound of Suffolk, one of the world's greatest composers. The seaside towns, Albury, Southwold, Dunwich. These are just places that give me endless joy, and which somehow so far have not been spoiled too much. Obviously, they've changed and such, but they still retain that sort of, when I go down to Southwold and have coffee on the beach down on there's a little bar, a little cafe that's been there for as long as I can remember, with sort of balloons and those windmill things outside for sale, and that just hasn't changed. It seems the same people selling the same sandwiches and the same coffee all my life. It's been there, and it's just wonderful, and I love it. And so, I mean, it is Suffolk is both a retreat, but it is also an inspiration. I'm never happier than when I'm there.
That's firstly very lovely to hear, of course. And two things actually to pick up on what you just said. My auntie has been a volunteer for Home Start for quite a long time, and yeah, she I think she gets as much, and probably all these volunteers get as much out of it. Being able to try and make a difference into these families as the families get from them. And I think that's such a nice thing.
Well, do say hello to her from me, but I think it is fantastic. And I've always thought with charity, I've tended, I work with a lot of different charities, but, I'm meeting East Anglia Children's Hospice when I'm next up in Suffolk, because they're building, they're developing one of their hospices. And I think that charity is really not about massive worldwide organizations, which may do good. I'm not decrying them, but nonetheless, putting thousands of pounds into conglomerates has always worried me. But one person, your aunt, helping another person, a family, that's what charity should really be about in my mind.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. One thing that I've become a lot more appreciative of, and what you talk about, is so my other half, my girlfriend, lives in Stoke Newington in North London, and I spent a lot more time up and down. Met at uni, came home back to Suffolk for me, back to London for her, and spent a lot more time sort of backwards and forwards. And I get far more now than I ever used to a appreciation of once I spend some time in busy London, and when it's nighttime, it doesn't really always feel like nighttime because there's still lights everywhere, and it's all that. I think I agree with you in the sense of you then come back here and it's kind of sleepy, but in a nice way sleepy, not in a too slow way. I think you do appreciate those things a lot more when perhaps you're out of it at times. Would you think that's fair when you then come back?
I think it's absolutely true. That's correct. I mean, I've never would have used the word sleepy about Suffolk because the people actually always strike me as quite active and vivacious
Yeah.
and anything but sort of backward and sort of half asleep. But you're certainly true about the night skies. The night skies from Orford are wonderful. The sort of the stars, so little light pollution. I can just about see Felixstowe on the horizon.
Yeah.
But I love Felixstowe too. There's not a town in the world that I can think of as being quite so sort of strangely Victorian and yet at the hub of, the very heart of world transport. It's sort of bizarre.
Mm. It's amazing, and it's so nice to hear you talk about that. Everyone will love it. Everyone will be able to will listen to this now and love the fact that you have really highlighted all these small little places. We'll have people listening in Blytheborough who will be delighted with the fact that you've given them a little bit of recognised fame on the show.
Well, if any of them ever fancy it, they should walk from the pub at Blytheborough across the marshes to Southwold. It's one of my favourite walks in the world. I take the dog, park just on the wrong side of the A12, cross over, and then go across the marshes through the woods and up to Southwold, across the is it Southwold Common there on the side there where there are adders signs everywhere? Beware the adders, and then down across the river and into Southwold. It's one of the great walks of my life.
I love walking, so I myself will also check that one out because I've not done it before. So I will do
It's a
that.
there and back walk, where you have lunch in Southwold and come back after that.
Ah, perfect. That's a perfect dog walking walk, isn't it?
And my dog does love it, yes.
Listen, Anthony, thank you so much
Then
for.
it's been a pleasure talking to you. And I want to wish you very much luck and success with your second book. Get it finished, get it to the publisher, and get on with the third.
Yeah,
That's my
I will.
advice.
I will do all that I can to be as quick as possible. It'd be great at some point whenever you're back in the county on all your different travels, to be able to come and have a chat with you again if it lines up with you. I'm
You
sure.
have Tessa's number. Write to her, and she'll set it up. Come to Orphan, have a beer.
Such an iconic author, such a brilliant conversation. I really hope you have enjoyed it. If you've made it this far, then please just make sure you have left that like, that subscribe, the comment, and all that jazz that we spoke about at the start of the video. Before our next conversation as well, do not forget to continue checking out Suffolk Sound for around the clock brilliant live radio. I will leave a description where you can find them on the app, on the website, or on your smart speaker down below. And until next time, I'll see you very soon.